Today's topic is around B2B and doing the migration and everything around that topic. Would you take the next one slide? So some of the things we looked at earlier, and I hosted 2 other webinars on the topic of first, how do we simplify the migration? What is it that the Figaf tool does in terms of migrations? And then the second one was, how do you actually get a DevOps process up and running? And these 2 is like the basis of being able to run also this B2B scenario. So when you find this interesting, also go back and check these things, because it is an important part of you being able to deliver this this integration content that you have. Good. Let's just so just one short question about how many integrations do you have, so we have an idea about what's the scope is. And then we have this disclaimer, and I think obviously, so just go to the disclaimer part, this disclaimer slide. So what Emil is going to show you is a demo. We've tried to take as many challenges into it as possible, but obviously once you run this in your own landscape, you will run into a lot of troubles. So there is going to be learnings. You will need to get your hands dirty, and you will need to learn SAP Trading Partner Management, because it is really an important part of this this setup. So 3 seconds more for the survey, and we can then just publish that. So yeah. So as you can see, most have less than 100 integrations, but there's also quite a bit that have more than 100. So I guess half and half. And then there is one with more than 1,000 integrations. So really a robust scenario here. So there are some showstoppers, and I guess what is the part that is actually blocking you from doing the migration. So the things that we would be covering today is, what are customers looking for? We would cover some of the learnings from recent projects that we did on this. We will show how you can simplify this migration, and then obviously we'll show why this makes sense with the Figaf tool. What is the important part of this. Okay, let's just take the next slide. So the team here today is me. Yeah, I know a lot about SAP integration, but not as much about EDI. So that's why I have both Kishore and Emil here that knows a lot more about this and knows how to actually operate such landscapes. And if we just look at the survey, we see that there is a lot of that thinks the B2B is a bit too complicated, and have difficulty understanding how to do robust change management. Hopefully, we will give you some better understanding about these things in these things, and also giving you a better, understanding of the landscapes. Yes. So yeah, I guess that's the who we are. We can obviously go into more details, but I guess, yeah, we have Kishore and Emil, yeah, that have done a lot of B2B work, and I think that's important to listen to their concerns on this topic. Good. Next. So that's one. So yeah, why do you want to migrate? And I think this is probably the big topic about why you actually want to do this. And I think B2B is, for the companies that are using this, like 10-30% of your revenue that goes through this, and this are your best customers. So you need to be able to work well with them and have a good way to handle these things, or handle them. you have spent a lot of money on building your B2B setup, and you want to retain this value. You don't need to build something new. And then, as we saw earlier, a lot of you have more than 100 partners, and that means you need to have really good strategy about how you're going to add all of these capabilities to it. And then there's the 2027 deadline. And the reason to bring that up, obviously, Integration Suite or PI works super well with EDI. We have seen large landscapes being run on it, but you need to be able to understand how do we actually move away from it, and this is what this is going to do. And you want to minimize the impact of your partners. You want to minimize the impact of how much you're going to test all of these different things. And that is the part where the tool can help. I do think that SAP's Trading Partner Manager is a good platform to work with EDI. It has, so it's, I guess, as you mentioned, it is a quite complex landscape to figure out how do we actually build something into it. But once you get to that point, the part about scaling it is good if you add something like the Figaf tool into it. Cool. Next. So next up is Kishore. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, I'm going to talk about my experience migrating the B2B scenario, which we have partially shared when we did the last time. And then from there, there are a couple of new things which were added. So I'm going to basically cover up and sum up what it is, because the customer is Medila, is healthcare medical manufacturer. And then yeah, they have both actual EDI over AS2 SFTP, and then the usage wise, they have functional profiles, they have advanced lookups, they have XSL over Java, everything. So the landscape, it is not volume wise complicated, but it is heterogeneous. I mean, the qualitatively, if you look at the customer, they have almost all the documents we can normally see in any EDI in multiple types of formats, and then the protocol. So that is the complexity. Next slide, please, Emil. And then the migration approach, as we mentioned also last time, we have used a Figaf tool and used the testing functionality together with DevOps to do the transport. So the one important message to take from the project is that the message mappings, when we did the migration and then did the testing with the Figaf tool, they are really a charm to test with, because they have no problems in terms of conversions when it is coming from PI to CPI. And then I will come to that in the next slide, because that is the very important feedback what we have received from the customer after our last webinar. And we did face some challenges by doing the transport manually, because that is something where SAP is clearly lacking in, because right now the setup is not scalable. Next slide, please. Yes, if you look at the learnings what we have from this project, it's primarily the way we have used Figaf, and to what extent we can leverage the functionalities what we have already together with the existing features rich from SAP. And The estimate wise, the effort wise, it is primarily the functional consultant effort is very minimum, and then the developer's effort is optimal. I wouldn't say it is maximum, but it's optimum, because where there is an error, that is where we have to fix. Otherwise, most of the simple scenarios, they are straight away executable. And what we have learned, the most important learnings I try to summarize, because that is actually where we see project can tip off from the cliff if they are not vigilant enough. So first thing is the structure and governance required for the project. That I think my colleague Emil will cover it in his presentation. And the other important thing is, with the existing setup, if you're not using Figaf, transport is actually not a go for multiple vendors. I mean, if you have to take the quantity wise, more number of agreements, thousands of agreements, that's a no-go right now, because it is a manual, it is an export import using the files, and it is prone to errors. So during this project period, we have actually feeding lot of interesting discussions with our product team, where there is value addition coming in. And one important feedback what I mentioned, that I have received from the customer, that wherever the test cases were there, the mappings were spot on. So there are no errors when the test case is actually provided by the customer. So if you have these things available, then you are actually ready to send this to production. So with that, I will give it to Emil for the continuation.
And I guess the main part of this is obviously that this project was run in the spring or late springs, early summer, and we have done a lot of improvement that is not probably not the parts that is or all the parts that Emil is going to show you is more or less something we have built after this project completed, making the journey much easier for you and your customers to participate in. Yes, Emil, would you?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, hello, welcome. I hope I'll show you a good demo and give you an impression of where we are with the Figaf tool now, and how we can hopefully improve all of our lives with a more optimized migration from PI, because it has to happen. There's a bunch of things I will maybe go over quickly, because they were addressed in the previous webinar, and also there's a new blog on the Figaf site where we go through a lot of the more detailed prerequisite steps of like what you need to prepare this and that. So there's some things I will go over a little bit quicker, and then you can review that at a later stage, how that in detail is handled, so we get more to the good stuff. And that I mean like the newer stuff that we have built. Like you will also see, this will also be a little bit of a teaser, because there's some features here in that is going to be available in the next version that we plan to release within the next weeks. So first, important, understand your current landscape. And that's, of course, you say, yes, we know. And but again, it's addressed in our previous videos. It's really important that you get an idea of how many agreements do we have, how many partners do we have, how many message formats, what's the quality of these things, and what's our plan for migrating these things. So get that understanding first. Work also on a naming convention. We have now optimized our tool more and more. So basically, if you use Figaf, you only need a naming convention for your agreement templates. But here, there's already also some, you can say, built-in assumptions about how you will name these agreement templates, and that is going to affect basically every other object that's going to be created, where absolutely the majority is going to be created automatically or by Figaf, the Figaf tool, and therefore it will have an effect on your system. So that's another thing you have to somehow review and get an understanding of before you begin big scale. And finally, there's a governance for the scope management. what are we moving, how are we moving, when are we ready to move. And I'm just saying, like, that's just to understand what do you expect of this, because I think if you once you go through your expectations of the governance of how is this going to be managed, you will find that this is where we run into problems in the existing integration suite. And this is where hopefully Figaf can help you. The procedures for mix, you should have that in place. I'm not going to really talk about that. And here also the max, it is built into our whole design. So again, we're saying max are SAP best practice. So whether we like it or not, or I almost said, then we have to somehow move towards that. And that's going to be also, this whole design is based also on that eventually we will start to move over into Mac universe. But this, of course, is based on the idea that's saying, like, to begin with, we'd like to migrate our existing mappings. But we are then at the same time preparing for a switch to Mac, which is super simple now with this tool. So this here, I will go through overall like 4 steps. First of all, like Kishore mentioned, don't forget your PI test cases. Again, it's kind of the prerequisite. If you want to know if your migration was successful, you test it. And don't create your test cases after you migrated and say, what are we going to test over this now? Let's get your test cases in place first. It'll just make, and again, our experience is those were the migrations where there were no problems, and the ones without test cases where there were the problems. We will go through how you can create partners in a uniform way with all the required objects, properties. And why is this important? Because you also have to look at what are our plans now. Are we do we want to migrate 100, 1,000 partners? What are the naming of the different objects we're going to use? And eventually, how is this going to move to production? Now, that's a whole story in itself. I won't talk too much about it, but there are, we think, a lot of problems and challenges with the transport of this thing, especially if you're planning to have a 3-layer system with the development, test, and production. We are working on something, but it's just to say it's difficult, but we have thought it into it and said, like, it's important that when you create your partners, you get all the objects you're going to need, also when you start moving from development to test to production. And finally, then the important thing is, of course, now the migration itself, why we're here to say, like, okay, how can we go from, we know we have a mapping, we know we have an agreement in PI, now we need to get into the integration suite. How can we do that in one step? And then I'll just show you also that how, with a click of a button, you can then take all your wonderful old PI test cases and say, now I want to use them in integration suite, and click, you have them, and you can start testing immediately after you've done your migration and activated your objects. So with that, I will stop my here and start the demonstration. So quickly, just to go through where we're coming from. Some of you might know this. You might come from a PI system and you say everything is just ICOs or receiver determinations and everything is in the integration builder or something. Some of you might also be familiar or use the trade partner management module and use the full B2B functionality. It's in PI, and that is our starting point, because it simply is simpler to say, okay, here is basically a nice setup in PI. How do we get this nice setup into our integration suite? So we have all of our partners here, and we have multiple then company codes, which is then simplified here in different cells with different country codes. We have a bunch of customers, as we can see, coming from different countries, and all of these are doing business with our different companies, and they're using different formats, and we have different processes, agreements in place. So this is basically what we want to move, which then brings us to the Figaf tool. When you go in here, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but again, it's a quick installation. There's a free trial to go have a look, and then you can check out all of these lovely menus. And there are mainly 3 of them I'm going to focus on today. And that is, first of all, here, our testing tool. Then we look at how to do the migration from PI to CPI. And then our B2B menu, which is a newer feature, which will give you the capabilities of better also managing, I almost said managing your trade partner management in the integration suite. We feel that SAP might have overlooked a little bit of like the management part in there of like how do you go in there and keep an overview of like what's going on, what's in my system, what is where is what used, and how do I, for example, run a test when I am changing something for all my Swedish customers or something. If it was something like that, then suddenly in the integration suite you get a little lost, and this is what we worked on. So let's just, because now I mentioned the testing tool, and I want to show you first also how quickly I can create a bunch of test cases. So if we go into our B2B and said like, well, we are interested in, and let's take this example I've been using a lot here. We have the sales orders here with some Americans, Costco, and they are using this X12 850, and it's version 5010. So this is the one we're interested in. And then there's a couple of ways where we can say, well, what we're interested in, let's just say, right now we haven't started migrating anything. This is just business as usual. But we say, now I happen to know that we have an interface, and we know here that Testos Muchos was our company. So here we have a generic ICO for managing all of our X12 850 messages. So in here, it will be handled, whatever's being done, whatever. So what we want to say, okay, we have now to begin with this ICO. That's our starting point. We want to record a bunch of messages. And let's just say we take 60 messages, and I want to make them unique per partner combination. I want to create a new one where we then say, this is the CI, the PI B2B. We're talking orders, X12, 810. And we just say, let's create this one and start with this. Record our test cases. So now we just got to wait for something to happen. I ask for future messages. There are options for doing other things, but we said, let's do future messages. Let me just show you. I'm just going to say, instead of just faking something, I am going to drop a bunch of messages in here and say, let's start processing. And this is something you could do also, saying like, well, you could, for example, use, if you have a repository of old production messages, say, okay, I have everything in my development or in my queue system, and then you could connect to your queue system and do your recordings there and say, okay, this is then how it should be done, and now I can go to development and change something afterwards. But at least now I make sure I have my test cases. How many was that? 160. But we can go over here. Let me refresh. Oops. And take here. Okay. So things are getting processed, as we see. And we have especially a bunch of X12s. So here are our X12s. Now, if you look at the ICO, again, the ICO is a generic ICO. There's nothing to see here. We can just see, okay, we're sending to one of our companies, but everything coming in here. But if we start looking at the B2B details, we can see now that this actually relates to a bunch of different customers. So we now know that there's something being processed. We can now do and poll. Have a look. And it's already found the messages we see here. Found, received, outbound 60. Let's create our test cases. Thank you. And here is like our first test cases. So what you see here is then that, okay, now I've created from the same ICO a bunch of messages in, and I already have for at least 6 different customers created a bunch of test cases. You see here the number, how many messages were processed for each of them. Okay, this means that now you have test cases. So if this was in scope for your migration, you can say, well, already today we know how to test it. I can just run this at any time and say, yes, let's run this test case. And it's executed, and it will come back and say everything is still perfect, because this is, of course, the message we just ran. So nothing has changed. So I can go and have a look at result and see here, yes, let's go poll results. Completed. And then here it gets a test result.
And then this is of course only running on the PI system again.
We are still only in the PI system. So that is the start. I'm not getting a result, polling result. It's completed. And now success. So our test case is a success. We know here now that we have successful testing in PI, everything's ready. So this means that now if we go back, we said, well, we have, sorry, let me jump back here. We said we have these test cases prepared. And let's see, one of them we have here is, for example, Costco Canada. So we go to our migration. Now, B2B migration. There's a new feature here you see up here that will come where you can now select whether it's B2B or non-B2B. Non-B2B is basically how we used to do it, where we said you can have a PI object, which is mostly ICOs, could be also a center agreement, but you have here different ICOs that you could filter from and you could start migrating them or dealing with them. Now, what we're working on here, the new feature is to say for the B2B, we want a special setup. You will be able to enable it, and then you will be able to determine the software components relevant for this. Why? Because we are focusing in on saying B2B migration mainly refers back to mappings. We have mapping programs. That is basically where we start often and say this relates to one or many B2B agreements that we have. So instead of looking at the TPM for agreements, we now look at operation mappings and say, okay, they are to be found in here. Like we also want to limit it, not to have suddenly saying like every single operation mapping in your system is suddenly in here in the overview, and that's just going to maybe cause confusion. Because in the overview, you will, when you enable B2B, only see the operation mappings from those software components that you listed. So we can see in here that there are a bunch of mappings ready. Now, before starting to do anything, and this again, if you look at the other blogs or the videos done before this, we say that the preparation require mainly three things. You got to prepare your partners, have them ready. You got to prepare your mix or max, and you got to prepare your agreement templates. Now, for the partners, we have the up down here said that you can use now Figaf to both have an overview of your partners and say, okay, what do we have in here? But you can also have a fast track here, an accelerator for creating a partner with all the objects needed for the migration. You can see up here, you can pick different tenant. So you can do this per tenant, just like you can, of course, monitor, for example, if you want to monitor and you have a centralized Figaf installation, or, then you can say, yeah, I want to have both my development, quality, and production systems available here, where I can then see what's in them, what they look at, like what's their state. So I'm going to use the CI training now today. You see there's a little bit fewer in here, but there you can see the different partners. And we've already migrated Costco Canada, which I was going to use. But if just use a different one for now, and we can say the lumberjack, then the quick thing is to say, well, basically you should have everything in your existing TPM. Maybe you don't, but this is, again, where you can work on that. We work on a naming convention for the short name where we say we keep it lowercase, and then with the ISO code for country. And there's a reason for that, which you will see later on also. You then start saying like, where are we? Are we on an on-premise? That's basically talking about, do we need to talk to a cloud connector or anything, or can we just go via cloud here? And we say, what are we talking about? It's an X12. Then we get the different versions, and we say it could be this, but it might also be this. Who knows? So I'm just going to add two of them. We say the adapter type here. I'm going to, in this case, use a process direct. But you can set this here, and so you get the correct communications in the beginning to begin with. Identifiers, you see, these are not mandatory, but I think they are very nice to have. And especially if you have them already over in your system, you can say, yes, I know a GLN code, I have it. And I can add my GLN code down here for GLN codes. SAP identifier, do we have that? Like, for example, an IDOC ID that we use. You can see in this one, it doesn't look like a valid one, but it is called an SAP. We have here IDOC and a partner ID, and we have a center partner inbound. So for this demonstration, I'm just going to assume that that is our SAP identifier. Similar DUNS number. I can take that from here. And finally, is there set mutually set value? I could just say, we say lumberjack. It could also be something we already had in existing or something. And then you just save. The partner is created by the Figaf tool, but more than that, see a bunch of stuff is being created here. What's important is you see now you get your development system, your test system, your production system. So in here, we have Lumberjack Canada. There's a link directly over to your integration suite. So even though you say, hey, I'm keeping this Figaf as for overview, what do I have or whatever, at any time, you can always jump over and have a look what it looks like in the master system, we can call it, I guess. And here you see then exactly, of course, the same partners that we have in the Figaf tool that is reflected there. But then now we also have this Lumberjack Canada, which was just created. It has already 3 systems created. And I don't know how many of you have tried to do this, but I find it a complete pain to do all this manually, to make sure that you create all of your 3 system environments that you need, make sure that they keep a naming convention, and that your communications that you're also going to need, you need to assign your type systems, which we used to call formats, right? And all the versions, you need to create channels, now called communications. All of this is like done, ready with a initial sort of generic setup. Similar with your identifiers, you can see here now, you get immediately these basic identifiers, which you're probably going to use. And here is the benefit that the aliases will now follow a naming convention. Yes, this is dictated by Figaf, but if you use this fast track for creating all of your partners, you will have a uniform way of how to create this. And I know myself, I've seen many times, I've done it many times also, where you just put identification and alias in the same, right? Because what's the difference? Here now we make sure that the alias have actually a meaningful description, which is going to be helpful if you or when you have to do, for example, create some agreements manually, which could be for a brand new implementation without any migration. Then you say, well, now I just need to create an agreement. Then it's nice to have this in place already. So that's the partner creation. I'm not going to touch on the mix and max, but it's assumed that mix and max are in place. Again, you can have a look at the other videos. And then also that we have created templates, our agreement templates. The agreement templates following a naming convention we have defined, and there's a reason for this. This is for making sure that we have a very unique ID, so to speak, for these agreements that are more transparent, and that has all the details of saying like, okay, what precisely does this agreement refer to? And this is important because this is going to affect how the design objects are going to be created if you're going to create anything custom, like, for example, migrated mapping in a custom iFlow. So if you start creating custom iFlows, where you're going to put them, now it's going to see we're going to create packages with exactly the same name as our agreements. And then you can say for any kind of partners using this flow in here, where we're talking B2B, our parent company, sales, inbound, order, X12, any of those, then we say that's the package where we will put any custom stuff within this specific process. So that's then also just to shortly say you need to have your companies in place, and just like with everything else, you need to have that in place with identifiers and with systems and everything. We have then, for our test, also worked on subsidiaries, because for some, they say, well, we want to be able to monitor company codes and say we are processing EDI for different company codes or something. And we said, yes, SAP is looking at something where they say you can use different parameters and stuff, put that in there. But I don't know if that's transparent enough. And our recommendation would be get an idea of how do you want to administrate like your EDI, what kind of areas do you want to split it up into, what kind of objects, business entities is going to be relevant. And if we say it's company codes, for example, it might look something like this, where we say we have a parent company, parent Denmark, and then we have subsidiaries for, now in this case, Austria, Germany, and the United States. And I just mentioned that also because you will need agreements per company/subsidiary. It is not something you can use generically, because that's the first thing you need to select when you create a template, is to say, what is this? Is it a company or which subsidiary? But you got to pick one. So you have to have templates for every single subsidiary that you have then. which again complicates it, and which again means that it's important to get this starting point correct and uniformly and organized, because it can very quickly turn into a big mess. Once you have this in place, and that's the toughest part, I would say now, is to say, once you have this in place, then you can say, okay, now we are ready. And then we can go over here to our migration. So let's take Lumberjack. So we see here it is. So Lumberjack is the operation mapping. It exists. This looks like the right operation mapping. We can see that 850, and there you can of course then go and align and say either this is something I have maintained in my TPM, might be something you have in here, or you go check that it's the right ICO. We now know that this is the ICO where we have recorded some test cases at least, and we know there Lumberjack orders do exist also. Before we go into that, so just to show you again, this is new, and this is really a strong feature, I think, where you can see now what are we planning here. We have all of these mappings that, well, we want to migrate some of them, right? But which one? Here, of course, you can see that you might migrate to different tenants. Again, you might say, well, our US subsidiary want to use one tenant, and our Austrian tenant subsidiary wants to use a different tenant. So you could migrate into multiple tenants if that's what you want. But then also here you can see tags, which we have, and which is a really strong feature. You can see here B2B, where you say B2B wave 1, what's in scope, and this is a way where you can manage your scope and say what's going on, what needs to be done. You could also say, like, we have a tag of saying developer Emil. What is Emil working on? What should he be doing? Why isn't he doing anything? I mean, you have a place now here for managing and seeing what's happening. Well, I didn't have to do Lumberjack, but let's just say that I have to do it anyways. So we say everything that's in scope, and we have Lumberjack right down here. So this we would like to migrate. Now, when you do that, you basically just choose here and say, yeah, let's go. And you will see up here that you have your migration menu. Now, we used to say that this can roughly more relate to A, application to application mappings, where you say, or processes, where you say, okay, I'm interested in this ICO, and that's what I want to move. You might also have an A where you say, I just want to preserve the mapping, but this is just internal Salesforce stuff or something. So let's just move this mapping, and that's fine. I just need a new iFlow. But this B2B we want to make special, because here suddenly we need something more and quite different, because we want to utilize, or rather we have to utilize TPM. So this is where we then say, okay, we want to migrate this mapping. You can also just select it here. And here again, you will see the list of only the mappings in the software components selected. For that, of course, you first need to check, sorry, what happened to my cursor? There it is, sorry. You just select our tenant. Where do we want to migrate to? So here we could say we could have our development system, we could have our queue system, or another company code, or whatever it is. I'm going to use my test system, and then we get into this menu. Again, there's soon going to be a video about the generic mapping. It's operational. It will be part of the next release, and it is to say that, yeah, what if you have global mappings that you want to reuse for like 50 partners? So you say like, okay, yeah, we maybe have 1,000 agreements, and we have 1,000 operation mappings. That's then like, okay, there's a lot to migrate, but that could be the case. You could also say, well, we only have 100 operation mappings, and we reuse them then to different partners. And this is where the generic mapping comes into place, where you can then say you can do once a migration into an iFlow that can then be utilized in multiple agreements by multiple partners, which you can also migrate from in here. So everything can be managed from in here. But for this example, I'm just going to say, let's not do a generic mapping, but let's do a partner-specific one, and say, this is definitely a Lumberjack mapping, and that's what we want. And again, you can see that's the list that we have available for our tenant. If I picked a different tenant, I will of course get the other list. And similar for this tenant, I also see the scenarios that we have in place. And here, once you have templates, once you have 100 templates, or however many you end up with, there is an easy search here, of course, and say, and that's again where your naming convention becomes important, and say, okay, I want everything for my orders, right? The same if I look for my functional acknowledgements, you can see then I have it both inbound and outbound. But for this case, I wanted order, and right now we only have X12 here. The scenarios, then you will see only the scenarios in the template. Now, again, we're following a naming convention. There's more about it in the other videos. I would really recommend that you have a look at it, why we are naming it the way we are naming it. But here you can see then that we have the purchase order, and we have the 4010, we have the 5010, and we have the 5010 with and without envelope. Again, if you look at the other videos, there's a reason for that. But I'm just going to pick the one with envelope and say that is our scenario. That's the one we want to use. And this is a Mac. So that has the benefit that there is actually a working Mac. There doesn't have to be, but in this case there is. And this will then also help us assign the right mix to use in the final agreement when it's being created, because of the details from the template. Now you see here the systems. By default, we will always go look for the development system and just say, well, I assume for your migration, you want to use the development, so you don't have to go and pick this manually every time. But you have all of the systems available here. So, I mean, you could have a proof of concept system or whatever I know, and say, then that's what we want to migrate it to. Then you go on each system and say, what is this? Here you get the possible type systems that are assigned. So here we have X12, but for this partner, Lumberjack, they might also have Edifact or some other like VDA or whatever I know. So that's now here, and similar you can see here for our SAP system, we then have different versions, but we're saying we're going up to a new HANA. And then here we have the two versions I selected when I created the partner with the fast track and said, these are the two versions we want to support for this partner specifically. And then we say, let's select this one. I mean, you can at any point change the partner in the integration suite, and it will be reflected here. So it's not like you are now locked in. You can go change and work in the integration suite just as normal, but this is to help you get there faster. Identifiers. Here you can see where suddenly maybe the naming convention of the aliases start to help you a little bit, because then in this case there's only one. You will see the identifiers available for the type system selected. So when you say it's IDOC, you will only see identifiers of the IDOC type. So here's only one, that makes it easier. And then you'll see for the trading partner system, then you will see for this company, what do we have that's X12? Well, there's only one, there's only DUNS. So let's hope that's the one. That, of course, we can check in the old PI agreement. And you can see then, because it's different over here. And again, the naming convention helps you to say, okay, what do we have here? Well, we have the set identifier, and we have the DUNS, and we have the GLN. And then we say, well, for this partner, we want to use GLN. Because if you looked at the agreement, lumber, oh, it's right there, right? I'm a little blind. Here it is. Then we can see that it's, and here, see, we're not getting much help from SAP here. You have to go look, but you just have to know that for DUNS, the 07 is, for X12, the 07 is a GLN, and the 01 is a DUNS. So that is what we've set up here. And we say that we want to use the IDOC identifier for Lumberjack, and there was only, there's the one, of course. And we then say, what's the communication? Again, the communication created for the systems. So again, as you see right now, I'm just going through a selection screen, pretty simple, checking. I do a check, which will then give us this list. Sorry, there. Which will give you a list of, now we have a bunch of source objects. And also just to show you, we're not just taking a simple mapping and say, here it's migrated, it's working. You see, this is doing a ton of stuff apparently, because there's a lot of functional libraries in play here. We have the mapping, we have the schemas, which is then our IDOC and our X12 message. And then we have all of these functional libraries that somehow need to be managed. And we can see there's a bunch of custom ones done only for us, our own little built things. And then we have the SAP standard B2B ones. And our recommendation is to say start by creating, because this is a partner-specific mapping, we're going to do that as a local object. The schemas we're going to reuse as much as we can, shared around. For our custom libraries, we say we're also going to share those because that's ours. But for the SAP ones, we say, well, here, let's assume then that you have done a standard migration using the standard SAP functionality for migrating functional libraries, and say, in this way, we're not going to trust whatever some developers might have done and little here and there and whatever, and where they put it and did they change it. Here, it's been migrated using the migration tool, and we then have our objects already in place for that. So that's to keep this as clean as possible, reuse as much as possible, so you don't have to have unique objects spread all over the place, but you actually keep reusing objects where it makes sense, where they are generic, and then keep something like the mapping, of course, a unique local object. Which then takes us back to another check, because that is also a built-in feature here where we said, just to make sure that you don't start the process and you have selected something wrong or something that doesn't make will not work. We're doing a complete check first to say all of these objects, is it correct? Is it there? Can you use it like this? And you can. It says there, and that means that you can do a preview, and you can also go directly to a migrate. So again, as you see, it's a new now mapping. So therefore it says like, okay, for this, you're going to request a license. This is where you will be able to have some tests, but eventually, if you like the tool, that is where you then have to work on a deal. But now we have done our checks. Sorry, our migration. So now this has been migrated and we're finished. And we can then go over here. And now you can see that there's been a change. Here, Lumberjack. And again, I could filter and say, I want to see everything Emil is working on, which I think is the selection I have now, or I'm just looking at wave 1 and set everything in wave 1, which Lumberjack was. And then now you can see agreements have been assigned, created. There's an agreement. There's a B2B scenario within that agreement. And there's an iFlow prepared also. Oh, sorry, I just need to see here. Here's my scroll. So iFlow is prepared, agreement is prepared. You can now say, well, we want to see this object. You can go directly from here, so you don't have to like know like where is this, where did we put it, or whatever. I mean, it is of course nice, and it should be transparent, and it hopefully also is once you look in your designs here in the integration suite. But you can also access it immediately from here, from the overview, and get in here and see here is our migrated mapping, where we need to make sure that we are working within the right formats. The PO B2B formats might be different. There we need to make sure that it's formatted into the CPI format, which again was different. Some of you that might have tried this will find that, wait a second, I thought an X12 was an X12 or an EDIFACT was an EDIFACT, but then we found that something was done a little bit differently in PO and maybe incorrectly in PO, or also some of the fields elements are named a little bit differently. So this is something we are all fixing for you, making sure that that's being handled. And there's some checks here to make sure that you are setting some parameters correct that you need to do. So, I mean, basically this can just be deployed for testing, because at least nothing seems to be a problem. And then that's in deployment mode. And similar, I can go look at my agreement, and there I go then and have a look in the integration suite. And now everything here has then been prepared for you. It says, okay, here's your agreement. This is the template we used. So we see there's a reference to the template, but the template only basically, I can tell you, the template only tells you which company are we working with and what MAC are we using, where you can also specify the mix, but we just find it a lot easier to just specify the MAC, because then you get all the MIC details for free immediately. So all of this is populated by now Figaf. The agreement is created. The business scenario is created. Our original transaction was called MAC and then the MAC name, but then we changed this to SIF for custom iFlow, which is your setting down here, where you can see you have then a custom integration flow set to true, and now you have a process direct address already maintained, which refers to the process direct that you have created in the design, which we just saw, which has just been deployed. So that means, well, I guess there's nothing stopping us from just activating this, and the process begins, and we're active. Oh, basically done. Always a good idea to do a little synchronization, I like to say, and say, let's just synchronize and make sure that we're up to date. But we see we are up to date. There was nothing new added, except suddenly down here you see some B2B scenarios objects have been added, which is part of our now what we just activated, right? We have deployed and we have activated in the integration suite. So at least now this is ready. So now basically we're done, right? And this is where it would be nice to know, does it work? And here is where we then say migrate test cases. You can then say, okay, I've selected, remember we're back at the operation mapping. We say I have an operation mapping. I want to know for this operation mapping, are there any ICOs using this operation mapping? And then we can go in here and see like, yes, there are some here. All of these test cases are available, and you can see, okay, all of these here are used in the same ICO where this operation mapping is included somehow. And then we say, okay, now it is nice to say, here is our lumberjack. And we say, this lumberjack test case here, which I could run in PI and see if it's still working in PI, just like the Costco is, which we very strongly assume, right? But instead, I want to say, you know what, this is working, I know that. So we're just going to migrate this immediately to CPI. So I create a new, but now we have SAP CPI, B2B, orders, X12, and say that's the one we want. Now your agreement, the scenario is already selected, so it already says that now for this specific agreement, and here's the big difference also. You see, before you would link it to an iFlow and say this test case now relates to this iFlow, but instead we said no, this relates to this B2B agreement. We are directly looking into the integration suite's TPM and say here is now a unique agreement, and this is what we want to link this test case to. I almost wish there were more buttons, but that was basically it. We're finished. That is now ready here to test. So let's try and do it. Run. Let's poll for some messages. And we got them all. So we have a test case, we have a result. I'm gonna look at this. I think we already have a test case result here. And then you see here, error. It failed, but it failed with a message. Because if you look at the integration suite, and let's just go to our B2B monitoring. You'll now see that we have 11 B2B messages, and that's our lumberjack. And they're all completed, all finished, process, inbound orders, inbound X12, processed and delivered. And what we have in our test result is actually saying, yeah, you did it, and it looks good. I mean, there's practically no differences except in the envelope. And this is where you can definitely expect changes. Now, first of all, it will do something like saying like, you know, this is not, it doesn't matter if you mapped it or not. And this is quite unique for the IDOC, is that it says that I will populate the best I can. So sure, you can map whatever you want, but then I will add what you forgot almost, right? So you can say IDOC number. Yeah, I don't care about that because we know SAP doesn't care about inbound IDOC numbers. It will just often generate its own unless you do a very custom setup in your backend system. So you can quickly here add to your ignore list, outmod. I don't think I've done this for 20 years. I don't think I've ever mapped the outmod, but okay. Test indicator, see, that could be relevant. And that's, of course, because we are in a test system, we get sure that we have the test indicator set. This could affect your partner profile setup, so be aware of that. Creation date, that definitely is going to change. I just put all of this because then you can see these one here, and that's where we have gone in and said all of those functional libraries, you remember, like a lot of them we are using the SAP CPI migrated ones where they actually do the same thing, all of these things of control context and all this and move these things around. But you might have some lookups. Maybe you have some weird lookups where you say, this is how we find the sender or the receiver. That's not, maybe you go look in TPM, maybe you go look in a value mapping or whatever. But this is where we said, whenever there are these strange lookups in PI, where we can't just move it because that doesn't make sense. There's nowhere to look. We have then put in a dummy function. Basically, you see still the functional library method, but it's been commented out. So you can still see the code, but then it has just been commented out, and then you see it will always return 3 ads. So it's easy to identify, and you say, here we need to do some work. Now, one thing you could do was just disable the mapping of the envelope, and then the CPI TPM would just populate the sender receiver themselves, because it says, I already know the sender and receiver. You specified it in your agreement. It's in the agreement which identifiers I should be using. So for lumberjack in here, and I see click, 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 here, in here, there I can see the IDOC identifiers. Yeah, you could also just go to Figaf. I'm just lazy and open a new. And then similar, you can just go in also and see it here, right? And say, well, I want to see lumberjack. And in here, I can see what are the identifiers. What's the identifier on receiver side for the sender? What's the receiver identifier for on receiver side? And similar, and this is where, like, once, if you imagine, once you have 1,000 agreements, and if you have 1,000 operation mappings that's been migrated, so you have 1,000 custom iflows, how to find the right one. And again, here, you see it directly here. There's a main flow assigned to this specific agreement. You say, this is the main flow you need to look at, which is our custom main flow. Because if you did not use a custom mapping, it's because you are using Max then. And then you can see for all of these here, we have a MAC assigned, but for the ones without MACs down here, it's because they all use custom flows. We could also have a pre-flow or post-flow, and then you would see it here if that was assigned in the agreement.
Emil?
Yes?
I think we should round up.
Are we, sorry, we're there. Yes, I need to finish. So yes, this is where I want to stop. And I think we can see we have a successful test case, and that was the best starting point for a migration. Yes, I will go back to the presentation.
Cool. Yes. And as we talked about, one of the things that we are looking into is how we can efficiently handle the transport of these things. So there is definitely some areas we can improve. We have seen some proof of concept that it works. So we're looking into how we can simplify this migration journey so you can both transport agreements and also all the iFlows in one tool that simplifies this setup. And then obviously we are looking forward to getting through or feedback from customers about how they're using these things. Next. So why you want to use Figaf? I think, as you've seen here, it's one tool that supports the full migration journey. We can migrate these things, and you have seen that it is actually possible to migrate. And also, when we have used the Medela case, we could also see that it was actually possible to migrate these mappings, make a few adjustments, and then they can reuse. And that means that this is something that really improves the cost, simplifies the cost of the migration. You don't need to rebuild Max for all your mix and match for all the integrations. You can reuse as much as possible, and this obviously shorten the project timeline and give you a consistent result that you say, okay, we have the test cases, we can prove that it works, there's no impact for the business, making it a lot easier to prove a test case or business case about the migration, reusing as much as possible. And then the tool is also something that allows you to actually reuse these test cases whenever you make changes, making it possible for you to work more on these scenarios. Next. So we have some ways for you to get started. We have this this workshop that we definitely would recommend that you go take. This is where Emil or Kishore will go through this setup together with you, create all the different things, make sure that this actually works in your landscape, and then actually be able to run this and see. Not everything would work, but hopefully this will give you a good idea of the scope and the gaps and how this migration will. If you do not want this, we also have a do-it-yourself option. This is the next one. Here you just go to figaf.com/guide. You take the free migration edition. You go through the videos Emil recorded about how to set this up. And do notice you need to know how to use the trading partner management. There is a lot of components in this that you need to understand. How do we create this in different ways? So that's the two ways you have for setting up these things. Yes, that was the short version. We have time for some questions. So if you have questions, do put them into the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to cover those as well as possible. But obviously, it is complicated to learn all these different things. But as you saw, it is possible, and it is something that would simplify your migration journey, giving you a good business case for it. Questions, comments? Do put them into the chat or the Q&A. And we'll try to cover those as we go through it. But I do hope you liked it and you can see how it works. Thank you, Kishore and Emil, for sharing your insights on this. I really appreciate it and have all the insight.